I'm Abel, 24 years old, and the perpetually overlooked middle child in a family that worshipped my older brother Jackson. For months I'd been paying $1,800 in rent to my parents while working two exhausting jobs just to stay afloat. Then Jackson got his girlfriend pregnant, and suddenly my parents gave my bedroom to them without discussion. "Be grateful for the couch," my father said when I objected. Little did they know, that single phrase would completely transform our family dynamic forever. Before I dive into how I turned this nightmare around, drop a like and comment where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for the karma in this story. I grew up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood outside Denver, Colorado. Our house was nothing fancy: 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a modest backyard, with a patio where we'd have summer barbecues. On the surface, we probably looked like the typical American family. But beneath that facade was a persistent undercurrent of favoritism that shaped my entire childhood. My father, Michael, works in construction management. He's tall, broad-shouldered, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and calloused hands that tell the story of his rise from site laborer to project manager. My mother, Sarah, is an elementary school teacher, petite, with prematurely gray hair. She stubbornly refuses to dye, claiming it gives her authority with the second graders. They both worked hard to provide for us, and I never questioned their love, just how unevenly it seemed to be distributed. I'm the middle child between my older brother Jackson, who's 27, and my younger sister Emma, who's 19. Jackson has always been the golden child, the firstborn son, who my father saw as his legacy, and my mother treated like her greatest achievement. Emma generally managed to stay out of family drama quietly, pursuing her interests in art and music, while I navigated the choppy waters of being compared to Jackson at every turn. The signs of favoritism were obvious from early on, but as a kid you don't have the vocabulary to name what you're experiencing. You just feel the sting of inequality without understanding its source. When Jackson turned 16, my parents surprised him with a used Ford Mustang, not brand new, but definitely not cheap. When my 16th birthday rolled around 2 years later, I received driving lessons and was told I could use my mother's car occasionally if I paid for gas. I ended up working at a local grocery store for nearly a year to save enough for a 15-year-old Honda that spent more time in the repair shop than on the road. College was where the disparity became impossible to ignore. My parents paid Jackson's full tuition at Colorado State, covered his apartment, and gave him a monthly allowance. He still managed to graduate with a mediocre GPA and a business degree he's barely used since. When it was my turn, they sat me down for a realistic discussion about finances that ended with me taking out student loans and working part-time throughout college. I graduated with honors in computer science and $30,000 of debt. Even during holidays, the pattern was consistent. Jackson would receive expensive gifts like gaming consoles or designer clothes, while I'd get practical items like socks or grocery store gift cards. One Christmas, he got a week-long ski trip with friends, while I received a new winter coat because my old one was embarrassing the family. The most frustrating part wasn't even the material differences. It was how my achievements were consistently minimized, while Jackson's were celebrated extravagantly. When I made the dean's list every semester, my mother would say things like, "That's nice, but don't get too caught up in grades." When Jackson passed a class he was previously failing, they took the entire family out to a fancy dinner to celebrate his perseverance. Despite all this, I still loved my family. I told myself they didn't mean to be unfair, that perhaps Jackson simply needed more support or attention for reasons I didn't understand. I made excuses for them well into adulthood, which is partly why I ended up living with them after college graduation. The COVID pandemic hit during my final semester, and the job market for new graduates collapsed overnight. My entry-level position offer was rescinded, and I spent months applying for anything remotely related to my field. Eventually, I landed a remote IT support role that paid decently, but not enough to afford Denver's skyrocketing rent prices on my own. My parents offered to let me live at home while I got on my feet, which seemed like a generous gesture until they named their price $1,800 monthly for my childhood bedroom. When I pointed out that was nearly as much as a one-bedroom apartment in some areas, my father said they were giving me a family discount, considering it included utilities and occasional meals. What made it more galling was that Jackson had moved back home 6 months earlier after breaking up with a girlfriend and was paying nothing while working sporadically as a bartender. When I asked about this discrepancy, my mother explained that Jackson was going through a difficult time and needed their support. Apparently, graduating during a global pandemic didn't qualify me for the same consideration. During this time, I started to find perspective through my friendship with our neighbor Ryan, who lived across the street. He was a few years older than me and had established healthy boundaries with his own family after similar experiences. He was the first person to plainly tell me that what I was experiencing wasn't normal, and more importantly, wasn't my fault. Around this time, Jackson started dating Mia, a waitress from the restaurant where he tended bar. She seemed nice enough, if a bit immature, and their relationship had the volatility of a high school romance despite both being in their mid-20s. They'd have intense arguments in public, break up dramatically, then reconcile just as passionately days later. My parents adored her immediately, praising her free spirit and inviting her to family functions within weeks of their first date. Meanwhile, my career in IT was slowly gaining momentum. I started taking additional certification courses online after work, building skills that would eventually allow me to move beyond technical support. I was exhausted most days, but the promise of eventually escaping my parents' house kept me motivated through the 18-hour days and constant belittlement. What I didn't know then was how quickly things would deteriorate, or how a single pregnancy announcement would upend everything I'd been working toward. By the 6th month of living with my parents, I'd settled into a grueling routine. I woke at 6 each morning to get some quiet time before the household stirred, worked my remote IT job from 8 to 5, then changed clothes and headed out to deliver food until around 11 at night. After factoring in taxes, I was bringing home roughly $4,000 monthly between both jobs, with $1,800 going straight to my parents for rent. The financial breakdown of our household was laughably unbalanced. I was paying nearly 2/3 of the mortgage on a house where I occupied the smallest bedroom, while Jackson contributed nothing despite occupying the second largest room. He claimed to be setting aside money for his own place, but his frequent bar tabs and new gaming equipment suggested otherwise. Beyond the rent, household responsibilities mysteriously gravitated toward me as well. If the dishwasher needed emptying or the trash needed taking out, my mother would knock on my door during my workday rather than disturb Jackson's sleep after his late bartending shifts. I started keeping a journal documenting these requests, and over 1 month, I'd been asked to handle household chores 43 times, compared to Jackson's 7, most of which he didn't actually complete. Jackson's irresponsibility extended beyond our home. He was frequently late to his shifts, or called out entirely, leaving coworkers to cover for him. He'd complain about his managers having it out for him when he received warnings about his attendance. His relationship with Mia followed similar patterns. He'd forget important dates or fail to show up when he promised, leading to explosive arguments that sometimes happened in our driveway late at night. Through it all, my parents made excuses for him. He's finding his way. Not everyone figures things out on the same timeline. He's just more of a free spirit than you are able. The subtext was always the same. Jackson's failures were temporary setbacks on his path to inevitable success, while my achievements were the bare minimum expected from the reliable, boring middle child. After several months of this arrangement, I tried discussing the unfairness with my parents. I chose a Sunday afternoon when everyone was relaxed, presented my concerns calmly, and even prepared a spreadsheet showing the financial and household labor disparities. My father dismissed it before I finished my first sentence. Every family is a team, and different members contribute in different ways, he said, as if Jackson's contribution was simply existing. My mother added that I'd always been the responsible one, and they counted on me because of that, essentially punishing me for being reliable. Despite these frustrations, I was making progress on my own goals. I'd managed to build a small emergency fund and was on track to have enough saved for a security deposit and first month's rent by year's end. I kept this information private, updating only my growing circle of supportive friends. One of those friends was Jasmine, a coworker from the IT department, who'd become a confidant during our lunch breaks. Unlike many people who heard about my situation, she never defaulted to, "But they're your family," as a reason I should tolerate mistreatment. Instead, she encouraged me to establish boundaries and recognize my own worth. "They're treating you like an ATM because you're letting them. She told me one afternoon after I mentioned my father had asked to borrow money for a golf trip. You don't owe them your self-respect, along with rent. The first major confrontation came when Jackson asked to borrow $300 for a weekend getaway with Mia to celebrate their 6-month anniversary. He caught me as I was leaving for my delivery shift, explaining that he was short on cash because he'd bought her a necklace that cost more than he expected. "I'll pay you back next week, promise," he said, with the easy confidence of someone who's rarely held accountable. For the first time, I refused. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I'm saving for my own place, and I need to stick to my budget." His face registered shock before hardening into anger. "Seriously, it's just $300. You're making plenty with your 2 jobs. Don't be so selfish." "It's not selfish to want to keep the money I earn," I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. "You could pick up an extra shift or 2 if you need cash." He stormed off, and within an hour my mother was calling to ask why I was creating problems in the family. When I explained, she sighed deeply. "Your brother was really counting on that trip to fix things with Mia. They've been having problems, and this might have helped." "That's not my responsibility," I said before ending the call and turning off my phone for the rest of my shift. The next week brought an Arctic chill to the household. My parents were civil, but cold Jackson, openly hostile. I found small ways to assert boundaries, installing a lock on my bedroom door, taking my dishes directly to my room and cleaning them privately, reducing my presence in common areas. It wasn't ideal, but it preserved my mental health while I continued saving. The most revealing moment came when I overheard my parents on a video call with relatives. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but I'd forgotten my laptop charger in the living room, and froze in the hallway when I heard my name. "Abel's doing fine," my mother said dismissively. "Working too much, but you know how he has always been the serious one." She quickly pivoted. "Jackson's really coming into his own at the restaurant. His manager is considering him for a promotion to shift supervisor." I knew for a fact that Jackson had received a final warning about tardiness just 3 days earlier. The promotion was a complete fabrication, but it fit the narrative they'd always constructed. Jackson was the star perpetually on the verge of greatness, while I was a footnote in the family story. That night, I added another $1,000 to my target savings goal, enough for 2 months' rent instead of 1 when I eventually moved out. I was increasingly certain I'd need the cushion to make a clean break when the time came. What I didn't realize was how soon that opportunity would present itself, or how dramatically circumstances would force my hand. It was a Sunday evening in late March when everything changed. My mother had spent the day preparing an elaborate family dinner complete with Jackson's favorite dishes and a bottle of expensive wine, a level of effort usually reserved for birthdays or holidays. I'd just returned from a quick delivery shift and was looking forward to a hot meal before collapsing into bed when I noticed the formal dining room table had been set instead of our usual kitchen eating area. "What's the occasion?" I asked my mother as I washed my hands at the kitchen sink. "Jackson said he and Mia have some news," she replied, her voice tense with excitement. "I think it might be something big." By the time we were seated, my father at the head of the table, my mother to his right, me across from her, and 2 empty chairs for the guests of honor, I'd already guessed what was coming. Jackson and Mia arrived 20 minutes late, both looking nervous but pleased with themselves. After we'd served ourselves and my father had poured wine for everyone except Mia, who requested water, Jackson cleared his throat dramatically. "So we wanted everyone together because we have something important to share." He reached for Mia's hand, their fingers interlacing on the table. "Mia and I are having a baby. You're going to be grandparents." The reaction was immediate and exactly what Jackson had surely anticipated. My mother burst into tears of joy, my father stood to embrace them, both exclamations of congratulations filling the room. I offered my own sincere congratulations despite my complicated feelings about my brother. The idea of becoming an uncle genuinely pleased me. "How far along are you?" my mother asked, already mentally decorating a nursery. 11 weeks, Mia said quietly. "We wanted to wait until after the first trimester to tell everyone, but..." She hesitated, glancing at Jackson. "But we've had a situation come up." Jackson finished for her, his tone shifting to something more somber. "Mia told her parents last night, and they didn't take it well. They're very religious, and they've given her until the end of the week to move out. My mother gasped. They're throwing out their pregnant daughter. That's horrible. We've been talking, my father said, looking at my mother, with the telepathic communication of long-married couples, and we think you two should move in here until you get on your feet. The baby will need a stable environment. I watched this conversation unfold with growing unease. Our house was already at capacity with 4 adults. Where exactly did they plan to put 2 more plus an eventual infant? Jackson answered my unspoken question. That's really generous, but we'd need actual space, not just the couch. With the baby coming, we need privacy and room for a crib eventually. My father nodded sagely. We've discussed it and we think the most sensible solution is for you two to take Abel's room. It's the closest to the bathroom, and it has that alcove that would be perfect for a changing table. The room went silent as 3 pairs of eyes turned to gauge my reaction. I sat perfectly still, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, waiting for someone to acknowledge the absurdity of what had just been proposed. You want me to give up the room I pay $1,800 a month for? I finally asked, my voice calmer than I felt. It would just be temporary. My mother rushed to add, though temporary in my family had a history of becoming indefinite, where Jackson was concerned, until they can find their own place. Where am I supposed to sleep and work? I asked, looking around the table. The sofa in the living room pulls out, my father said, with a dismissive wave. We can set up a folding screen for some privacy during your workday. And my things. My desk set up for work. My clothes. We'll move your desk to the corner of the living room, my mother suggested, as if rearranging my entire life was a minor inconvenience. Your clothes can go in vacuum bags under the couch, or in part of Emma's closet. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I understand they need help, but I'm paying rent for that room. Full rent. Couldn't Jackson and Mia take the basement? It has the old futon already. The basement gets too cold. Jackson interjected. It wouldn't be healthy for the baby. The baby that isn't born yet and won't be for another 6 months. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. My father's expression hardened. I think you're forgetting that this is our house, Abel. We decide who stays where. You should be grateful we're letting you stay at all, even if it's just the couch. Most parents would have kicked you out at your age. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Grateful. For a couch. In a house where I paid $1,800 monthly, while my brother paid nothing. What about my rent? I asked. Will that be adjusted since I'm losing my private space? My mother looked uncomfortable, but my father spoke without hesitation. The rent covers living in this house, not any specific room. If anything, with 2 more people, utilities will go up. We might need to revisit the amount. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. He was seriously suggesting I might need to pay more for the privilege of sleeping on a couch in a communal space. Jackson and Mia won't be contributing. I asked, already knowing the answer. They need to save every penny for the baby, my mother said. Medical bills, supplies, childcare, it adds up quickly. So does rent, I muttered. Don't be selfish, Abel, Jackson said, with the self-righteousness of someone who's never been asked to sacrifice anything. This is your future niece or nephew we're talking about. The conversation continued around me, plans being made for my displacement as if I weren't sitting right there. They discussed which of my furniture pieces would need to be moved to storage at my expense naturally, and how quickly they could repaint the nursery, my room, a more appropriate color for a baby. That night, I lay awake staring at my ceiling. The ceiling I would soon lose the privilege of calling mine, despite funding a significant portion of the mortgage beneath it. I thought about the room I'd kept, meticulously organized my workspace. I'd carefully arranged for proper ergonomics during long workdays, the single space in the house where I could close a door and exist without scrutiny. The transition happened with brutal efficiency over the next 2 days. I returned from work on Tuesday to find my belongings already boxed and moved to the living room, my bed disassembled and replaced with Jackson and Mia's queen mattress from his room. My desk had been wedged into a corner behind the living room couch, my computer equipment haphazardly piled on top. Several of my things were damaged in the move. A framed certificate cracked, a collectible figurine broken at the base, my desk chair missing a wheel. When I mentioned these issues, my mother said, "These things happen during moves," without offering to replace anything. My first night on the pull-out couch was miserable. The mattress was thin, with a prominent bar that pressed against my spine no matter how I positioned myself. The living room never fully darkened thanks to the streetlight outside, and every house noise seemed magnified in the open space. Morning was worse. My father woke at 5:30 and made no effort to be quiet as he prepared coffee and breakfast before work. My mother followed at 6:45, turning on morning news at a volume that made continued sleep impossible. By the time I dragged myself to my awkwardly positioned desk at 8, I'd had perhaps 4 hours of broken sleep. Privacy became a distant memory. I changed clothes in the downstairs half-bathroom, hunching uncomfortably in the small space. Personal phone calls had to be taken in my car. When I needed to focus intensely on work, the normal household sounds, doors, closing water, running conversations in adjacent rooms became maddening distractions. Meanwhile, Jackson and Mia settled into my former room with entitled ease. They rearranged furniture, hung their own art on walls, still showing shadows of where my things had been, and treated the space as if it had always been theirs. They played music loudly, laughed, and argued without consideration for my work calls, and frequently left dishes and food wrappers scattered around the common areas. The inequity grew more pronounced daily. I continued paying full rent for a fraction of the space and comfort, while contributing more to household chores than ever. Jackson and Mia contributed nothing financially and added significantly to the workload with their careless habits. When I raised concerns about noise during my work hours, my mother suggested I be more flexible since Mia is dealing with pregnancy symptoms. When I mentioned the dirty dishes accumulating in the sink, my father said I should pitch in more because we're all supporting your brother during this important time. Every conversation reinforced the same message. My needs were secondary, my comfort dispensable, my contribution expected but unworthy of acknowledgement. I was the family pack mule valued only for what I could carry for others. What they couldn't see was the resolve hardening within me with each dismissive comment and thoughtless imposition. The phrase, "be grateful for the couch," played on repeat in my mind, a mantra that was rapidly transforming from a source of pain to a catalyst for action. They had pushed too far, and I was reaching my breaking point. 2 weeks of living on the couch was all it took to completely destroy my quality of life. My work performance began to suffer noticeably. I was missing details on tickets, forgetting to follow up with clients, and struggling to stay focused during team meetings. My supervisor sent a concerned email asking if everything was all right, noting that my metrics had dropped significantly from my usual standards. Sleep deprivation became my constant companion. The living room served as a thoroughfare for everyone in the house, with people passing through at all hours with no regard for my presence. Jackson often came home from late shifts and turned on the television, claiming he needed to unwind before bed. Mia developed pregnancy-related insomnia and would wander downstairs for midnight snacks, turning on lights and rattling dishes, just feet from where I was trying to sleep. My belongings were no longer my own. I'd returned from my evening delivery shift to find someone had used my laptop, moved my things to make space for their activities, or borrowed my chargers without asking. My food disappeared from the refrigerator despite being clearly labeled. When I bought a small mini fridge to keep near the couch, my father called it passive-aggressive and unnecessarily territorial. The final straw came during a crucial video call with potential clients. I had warned everyone about the meeting days in advance and asked for quiet during the 45-minute presentation. 20 minutes in, Jackson and Mia burst through the front door with takeout food, laughing loudly about something that had happened at the restaurant. When I frantically gestured for quiet, Jackson rolled his eyes and turned up the volume on his phone to watch a sports highlight reel. I had to apologize to the clients for the unexpected background noise and finished the call feeling mortified and undermined. That same evening, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. My parents were discussing finances in the kitchen, unaware that I was returning from taking out the trash. "We should talk to Abel about increasing his contribution," my father was saying. "With the baby coming, we'll have additional expenses, and he's the only one with stable income." "Do you think he'll agree?" my mother asked. He seemed upset about the room situation. "He doesn't have much choice. My father replied confidently. Rents in this area are through the roof, and he can't afford to live alone on his salary. He's getting a bargain even with the couch situation. Where else is he going to go? I froze outside the kitchen door, a cold clarity washing over me. This wasn't a temporary hardship to help family through a difficult time. This was my future if I allowed it to be. I would continue to be squeezed for more while receiving less expected to subsidize my brother's life choices while sacrificing my own well-being. That night, I texted Ryan and Jasmine asking if they could meet for coffee the following evening. I needed perspective from people who weren't enmeshed in my family's dysfunction, who could see the situation without the fog of emotional manipulation that had clouded my judgment for so long. We met at a quiet cafe, far from my neighborhood. I laid out everything that had happened, surprised by how my voice shook with suppressed anger as I described being relegated to the couch while still paying full rent. That's not just unfair, it's exploitative, Ryan said when I finished. They're taking advantage of you because you've never given them consequences for treating you this way. Jasmine nodded in agreement. You know, my brother just mentioned his roommate is moving out next month. It's a nice 2-bedroom downtown, about $1,500 a month for your half. That's less than you're paying now for a couch. A spark of possibility ignited within me. Is he looking for someone right away? I can give you his number, she offered. The current roommate is leaving in 2 weeks, so he's eager to find someone. 2 weeks. The time frame seemed simultaneously, impossibly soon, and not soon enough. Could I really coordinate a move that quickly? Did I have enough saved? What would my family say? The last question answered itself. They would try to prevent it. They would use guilt, obligation, and manipulation to keep their reliable source of income and domestic labor firmly in place. If I was going to escape, I would need to do it without telegraphing my intentions. The next day, I met Jasmine's brother Marcus for a tour of the apartment. It was everything my current situation wasn't: clean, quiet, with private bedrooms and a respectful potential roommate who worked regular hours. The location would cut my commute time for deliveries significantly, and the dedicated office space in the bedroom would be infinitely better for my remote work. I signed the lease that afternoon, putting down the security deposit and first month's rent from my emergency savings. A weight lifted from my shoulders the moment I received the keys, even though I wouldn't be moving in for another 12 days. Those 12 days became an exercise in strategic planning and emotional compartmentalization. I identified a Saturday, when my parents would be attending a baby shower for Jackson and Mia, giving me several hours to move without confrontation. I quietly arranged for Ryan and 2 other friends to help with the move, borrowing Ryan's truck to save on moving costs. I sorted through my possessions surreptitiously, donating or discarding items I no longer needed when no one was home. I gathered important documents and irreplaceable items, first storing them in my car's trunk where they wouldn't be noticed missing. I arranged for mail forwarding to start the day after my planned move. The financial aspects required careful calculation. I had enough saved to cover 2 months of rent and basic necessities if necessary, but I'd need to be frugal initially. I created a detailed budget accounting for every expense, including setting aside money for a basic furniture package from a discount store to replace what I'd be leaving behind. Through all these preparations, I maintained my usual routine, outwardly working both jobs, contributing to household chores, enduring uncomfortable nights on the couch. I avoided conflict that might raise suspicions and deflected questions about my long-term plans, with vague responses about focusing on work right now. Surprisingly, my younger sister Emma became an unexpected ally. She'd returned from college for spring break and was horrified by the living arrangement she found. "This is completely messed up," she whispered one afternoon, when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. "They've always favored Jackson, but this is extreme even for them." When I cautiously mentioned my plan to move out, expecting her to try to talk me out of it, she instead offered to help pack while the family was at the baby shower. "I'll tell them I'm not feeling well so I can stay behind," she said. "They won't question it because it means more attention for Jackson and Mia." Having Emma's support strengthened my resolve. If even my conflict-avoidant younger sister recognized the injustice of the situation, I wasn't overreacting or being selfish, as my parents had suggested. The final confirmation that I was making the right decision came 3 days before my planned move. I'd splurged on expensive noise-canceling headphones to make working from the living room marginally more tolerable. I left them on my desk while taking a quick shower, returning to find Jackson using them to play a video game. When I asked for them back, he yanked them off carelessly, snapping the headband and rendering them useless. "Oops," he said with minimal concern. "They're just headphones. Buy another pair." That moment crystallized everything. The casual disregard for my property, the assumption that I could and should absorb financial losses for his benefit, the complete absence of respect or consideration. This was the dynamic that had defined my life for 24 years. I'd given my family countless opportunities to treat me with basic fairness and respect. Their consistent failure to do so wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary lapse, it was a deeply ingrained pattern that would never change as long as I remained within it. As moving day approached, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, anxiety, about the confrontation that would inevitably follow, guilt about the suddenness of my departure, but predominantly, a growing sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself over the role I'd been assigned in my family's dysfunction. The couch I'd been told to be grateful for had become the catalyst for a decision long overdue. In trying to diminish me to a piece of furniture, they had inadvertently pushed me toward freedom. Moving day arrived with perfect synchronicity. The spring morning was overcast but dry, as my parents bustled around preparing for the baby shower. My mother fretted over the gift they'd purchased, an unnecessarily expensive stroller that had required 2 months of payments, while my father polished his shoes for the occasion. "We'll probably be back around 4, my mother told me, as she adjusted her earrings. "There's leftover chicken in the fridge, if you get hungry." "Oh, and could you throw in a load of Jackson's work shirts? He mentioned he's running low." I nodded noncommittally, knowing I would be long gone by the time they returned, along with any willingness to do my brother's laundry. Emma shot me a meaningful glance from the stairway, her stomach bug already established as her excuse for staying home. The moment their car disappeared down the street, our plan sprang into action. Ryan's truck pulled up, exactly 3 minutes later, followed by 2 more friends in a sedan. With 5 of us working efficiently, my remaining belongings were packed and loaded within 90 minutes, a testament to how little space I'd actually been permitted to occupy in the house. Emma helped clean the areas where my things had been erasing evidence of the hasty move. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, as we made a final sweep of the living room. "They're going to lose their minds." "I'm sure," I replied, feeling calmer than I had in months. "I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep them warm." Before leaving, I placed 3 items on the coffee table: my house key, a check covering rent through the end of the month. I could afford to forfeit 2 weeks' worth to maintain the moral high ground, and a letter explaining my decision. The letter was factual and unemotional, detailing the inequity of my living situation, the disrespect I'd endured, and my need for a healthier environment. I ended it by asking for space while I established my new living arrangement, providing only my email address for contact rather than my new physical address or phone number. The drive to my new apartment took only 20 minutes, but it represented crossing a boundary I'd never successfully established before. Each mile increased the lightness in my chest, a physical manifestation of the burden I was leaving behind. Marcus was waiting at the apartment to help unload. The actual moving-in process was relatively simple, given my limited possessions, a bed frame and mattress, purchased the week before, and delivered that morning my desk and computer equipment, clothing, and a few boxes of personal/items. The furnished common areas meant I didn't need to worry about kitchen supplies or living room furniture immediately. By mid-afternoon, my bedroom was organized enough to be functional. I sat on my new bed, looking around at the modest but private space that was now entirely mine, and felt a complex wave of emotions: pride in my independence, lingering sadness for what my family relationship should have been, anxiety about the plight, inevitable fallout, but predominantly profound relief. That relief was short-lived. At 4:30, my phone erupted with notifications. My parents had returned home to find my things gone, and my letter on the table. What followed was a barrage of texts and calls, cycling through the predictable stages of their manipulation playbook. First came shock and confusion. "What is this letter? Where are you? Call us immediately." Then, anger. "How dare you leave like this without discussing it with us first? After everything we've done for you." Next was guilt and emotional manipulation. Your mother is crying. Is this how you repay us for putting a roof over your head all these years? Finally, threats. If you don't call us back within the hour, we'll report you missing to the police. We're worried about your mental state. I sent a single text to the family group chat. I am safe and well. I've moved into my own place as explained in my letter. I need space right now and will reach out when I'm ready. Please respect this boundary. Then, I muted notifications from their numbers and focused on organizing my new space. Emma called from her private phone later that evening. It's absolute chaos here, she reported. Dad's ranting about ingratitude. Mom's alternating between crying and calling everyone we know to see if they've heard from you. And Jackson is mainly concerned about whether you'll still be paying rent until they find someone else. How are you handling it? I asked, concerned about her position as the remaining child. I'm staying out of the line of fire, but I did point out that they brought this on themselves. Dad didn't appreciate that perspective. She paused. They're coming up with all sorts of theories about why you left everything from mental health crisis to secret drug problem. They're considering every possibility except the truth that they treated you unfairly and you finally had enough. That pattern continued over the following days. My father sent emails with subject lines like family emergency, containing thinly veiled threats about cutting me off from family support I hadn't actually received in years. My mother left tearful voicemails asking what she'd done to deserve such treatment, conveniently forgetting the countless instances of favoritism I'd endured. Jackson sent a single text, calling me selfish for abandoning the family when we need you most. I maintained radio silence, focusing instead on establishing my new life. My work performance improved dramatically once I had adequate sleep and privacy. My delivery income actually increased thanks to the central location of my new apartment, reducing travel time between orders. Marcus proved to be an excellent roommate, respectful of boundaries, clean, with a similar work schedule that meant we both appreciated quiet evenings. We weren't close friends initially, but we developed a comfortable coexistence based on mutual respect. The first test of my resolve came when my mother texted about a family dinner the following Sunday. Everyone will be there, she wrote. We need to discuss the situation as adults. Your father is willing to listen to your concerns. I declined politely but firmly. I'm not ready for a family meeting yet. I need more time to establish my independence. This set off another round of accusatory messages, but I held firm. I was beginning to understand that each time I maintained a boundary, their attempts to breach it became less effective. Their power over me existed largely in my willingness to accept their framing of reality. 2 weeks after I moved out, the tone of their messages began to shift. My father's imperious demands gave way to awkward attempts at reconciliation. We could discuss adjusting the rent if you wanted to come back, he wrote. Your room situation could be reconsidered. My mother became increasingly concerned about appearances. What do we tell people about why you moved out so suddenly? She asked, worrying more about social perception than my actual well-being. The most revealing message came from Jackson. Mom and Dad are stressed about money. I think they were counting on your rent for the mortgage. Not trying to guilt you, just thought you should know. And there it was, the truth they'd never openly acknowledge. They had become dependent on my financial contribution, even as they minimized my worth and comfort. My leaving had created not just an emotional void, but a practical one they were struggling to fill. I continued focusing on my own growth, processing years of accumulated resentment with the help of a therapist I could finally afford now that I wasn't paying inflated rent. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my exhausting work schedule. I began dating Jasmine, our friendship evolving naturally into something deeper, once I had the emotional bandwidth for a relationship. Throughout this period, Emma remained my connection to the family, providing updates without pressure or judgment. Through her, I learned that my parents were indeed struggling financially without my contribution, that Jackson had been late with bar tabs enough times to be at risk of losing his job, that the reality of impending parenthood was creating tension between him and Mia. They made their bed, I told her, during one of our regular coffee meetups. Now they're finally having to lie in it. I think they're starting to realize that, she replied thoughtfully. They talk about you differently now. Less anger, more reflection. Dad actually admitted the other day that they might have taken advantage of your sense of responsibility. It was a small acknowledgement, but from my father it represented a seismic shift. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope that our relationship might eventually transform into something healthier, not because I returned to their orbit, but because I had the courage to leave it. 1 month after my departure, the financial reality of my absence hit my parents' household with full force. The mortgage payment they'd come to depend on my rent to cover came due without my contribution. Jackson's sporadic bartending income proved insufficient to fill the gap, especially after he lost his job following a string of no-shows and tardiness. My mother began reaching out with increasingly frequent and desperate messages. "We're considering renting your old room to offset expenses," she wrote. "But we wanted to give you first option to come back. We could discuss a more reasonable arrangement." My father, typically stoic about financial matters, actually called and left a voicemail mentioning temporary cash flow issues and suggesting we discuss options for you to help out the family during this transition. The subtext was clear: they wanted my money, not necessarily my presence. I maintained firm boundaries while remaining respectful. "I'm not in a position to contribute financially to the household anymore," I replied to my mother's message. "I have my own expenses now. You might consider asking Jackson to get a more reliable job if you're struggling." This direct challenge to their established family dynamic, suggesting Jackson take responsibility, rather than having me accommodate his lack thereof, was met with predictable defensiveness. "Your brother is going through a lot right now, with the baby coming," my mother responded. "It's a stressful time for him." "It's a stressful time for everyone," I wrote back. "That's why adults have jobs." During this period, my sister Emma became increasingly aligned with my perspective. She'd watched the fallout from my departure, with clear eyes, observing how quickly my parents' concerns shifted from my well-being to their financial predicament. During her weekend visits home from college, she witnessed firsthand the deteriorating atmosphere. "Jackson and Mia fight constantly now," she told me, during one of our regular coffee meetups. "Usually about money or his job hunting, which consists mainly of complaining about how hard it is to find work, rather than actually applying anywhere." My relationship with Emma deepened during this time. She confided that she'd always felt sidelined by the Jackson-Abel dynamic, the golden child, and the scapegoat left little oxygen for the forgotten middle child. My departure had inadvertently pushed her into a more central role, one she was navigating with growing confidence. "Mom tried to ask me to contribute some of my scholarship money to household expenses," she said with an eye roll. "I told her I'd be happy to pay rent like you did if I could also have your old room, but, strangely, that wasn't what she had in mind." 6 weeks after I moved out, I made my first brief visit back to the family home to collect some mail that had arrived before my forwarding address was active. The physical changes in the house were immediately noticeable. Unwashed dishes piled in the sink, laundry unfolded on the living room couch, a general air of disarray that had never been permitted when I lived there. The emotional atmosphere was equally disheveled. My mother hugged me awkwardly at the door, a mixture of relief and resentment in her expression. My father acknowledged me with a stiff nod from his recliner, pride still preventing him from the apology that might have begun healing our relationship. Jackson emerged from my former bedroom, looking haggard, the impending responsibilities of fatherhood sitting visibly heavy on his shoulders. When we made eye contact, his initial expression was one of shamefaced guilt, quickly masked by defensive hostility. "Finally decided to show your face," he muttered, as he passed me in the hallway. "I came for my mail," I replied evenly. "How's the job hunt going?" The question was neutral, but he took it as an attack. "Must be nice to pass judgment from your cushy IT job," he snapped. "Some of us are dealing with real adult problems. Like impending parenthood with no income." The words left my mouth before I could reconsider them, but I didn't regret their accuracy. "You abandoned your family when we needed you most," he said, voice rising. "Mom and Dad gave you a home when you had nowhere to go after college, and this is how you repay them. By leaving them hanging financially." The irony of his statement was so profound I almost laughed. "They didn't give me anything, Jackson. I paid $1,800 monthly for the privilege of sleeping on a couch. You've lived here rent-free for years, while they subsidized your lifestyle." "Boys, please," my mother interjected, the familiar mediator role sitting uncomfortably on her now that the family dynamic had shifted. "Abel just came for his mail. Let's not turn this into something ugly." It became ugly when he decided his comfort was more important than family loyalty, Jackson retorted. I took a deliberate breath, centering myself. 6 weeks earlier, this confrontation would have escalated into a shouting match, or more likely, I would have acquiesced to keep the peace. But the perspective gained from distance allowed me to respond with a calm confidence that was entirely new. Family loyalty goes both ways, I said quietly. When was the last time anyone in this house considered my needs as equal to yours? When did anyone acknowledge the financial and emotional burden I carried while you contributed nothing? I didn't abandon the family. I stopped enabling a dynamic that was harmful to everyone, including you. The stunned silence that followed suggested my words had landed with unexpected impact. I collected my mail from the kitchen counter and turned to leave. I wish you all the best, truly. But I won't set myself on fire anymore to keep everyone else warm. As I reached the door, my mother followed me onto the porch, her voice lowered. Abel, wait. Your father would never admit it, but things are difficult right now. Jackson's struggling to find work, and with the baby coming, we could really use your help, even a small loan, until we figure things out. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear beneath the manipulation. She was facing the consequences of years of enabling behavior, and didn't know how to navigate this new reality. For a moment, I felt a twinge of the old responsibility, the familiar urge to rescue her from a situation largely of her own creation. I can't give you money, Mom, I said gently. It wouldn't solve the actual problem. Jackson needs to step up, and you and Dad need to let him fail sometimes so he can learn to stand on his own. Her expression hardened slightly. So you're just abandoning us to teach us some kind of lesson? I'm taking care of myself after years of putting everyone else first, I corrected. There's a difference. I'm happy to be part of the family, but not at the expense of my own well-being anymore. The visit marked a turning point. My parents organized a family meeting the following weekend, which I declined to attend, but Emma reported that it had been surprisingly productive. For the first time, my father had acknowledged that perhaps they'd enabled Jackson's irresponsibility and that changes were needed. The most surprising development came 2 weeks later when I received a text from Mia asking if we could meet for coffee. Curious and a bit wary, I agreed to a brief meeting at a cafe midway between our residences. She looked tired but more centered than I'd seen her previously, one hand resting protectively over her now visible pregnancy. I wanted to talk to you directly. She began after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. I know things were handled badly with the room situation. I didn't fully understand what was happening at the time. Jackson told me you were happy to help out, and that the financial arrangement was fair. Her honesty was unexpected. It wasn't fair, I said simply. I was paying full rent for decreasing space and respect. She nodded. I see that now. After you left and the financial situation became clearer, I started questioning other things Jackson had told me. She stirred her herbal tea thoughtfully. I love him, but he's never had to face consequences before. It's making the pregnancy more stressful than it needs to be. I'm sorry about that, I said, genuinely meaning it. The baby deserves stable parents. That's why I got a job, she said with quiet determination. Part-time administrative work at a medical office. It has good benefits for the baby and flexible hours. Jackson was upset at first. He had this idea that I should stay home while he provides, despite the fact that he's not currently providing anything. I couldn't help but respect her pragmatism. That's really responsible of you. Your leaving was a wake-up call for everyone, she continued. Your parents are selling their boat to help with the mortgage. Jackson had an interview yesterday, not a bartending job, an actual entry-level position with regular hours. He probably wouldn't have done it if the financial pressure wasn't real. As we parted, she hesitated before adding, For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Not just for yourself, but for all of us. Sometimes a system needs to break before it can be rebuilt into something healthier. Her words stayed with me long after our meeting, reinforcing my growing conviction that leaving had been an act of courage rather than selfishness. By refusing to perpetuate the dysfunctional patterns that had defined our family, I had created space for something new to emerge from the wreckage of the old. 2 days later, I received an email from my mother with a subject line that made me pause. I'm sorry. The body contained just a few lines. I've been thinking about what you said on the porch. You're right that we've expected too much from you, and not enough from Jackson. I'm not saying we've fixed everything, but I'm trying to see things differently. When you're ready, I'd like to talk more. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of all that had happened, but it was a beginning, a small crack in the foundation of denial that had supported our family dynamic for decades. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope that real change might be possible, not because I had returned to their orbit, but because I had found the courage to leave it. 6 months after my abrupt departure from my parents' house, my life had transformed in ways I could hardly have imagined while sleeping on that uncomfortable pull-out couch. My career had flourished once I had the space and rest to focus properly. I'd received a promotion to senior IT specialist with a substantial raise, allowing me to build my savings account while still enjoying occasional luxuries. My relationship with Jasmine had deepened into something serious and nurturing. She'd been there from the beginning, witnessing my journey from exploited family member to independent adult, and her unwavering support had been instrumental in maintaining my resolve during difficult moments. Perhaps the most surprising development was my sister Emma's decision to move in with me when her semester ended. I can't go back to that house, she'd said. Not after seeing how they treated you and how much happier you are now. Marcus had been planning to move in with his girlfriend, so the timing worked perfectly for Emma to take over his half of the lease. Living with my sister strengthened our bond considerably. Free from the shadow of Jackson's golden child status, we discovered shared interests and perspectives we'd never fully explored while navigating the tense atmosphere of our parents' home. She flourished in the drama-free environment, her grades improving, and her confidence blossoming. When Mia gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Ethan, I found myself genuinely excited to become an uncle. Despite the complicated history, I attended the small celebration at the hospital, bringing a thoughtfully selected gift and offering sincere congratulations. Jackson appeared simultaneously exhausted and transformed by fatherhood, a new humility evident in his demeanor. "Thank you for coming," he said awkwardly, as we stood looking at the newborn through the nursery window. "I wasn't sure you would." "He's my nephew," I replied simply. I'd never punish him for adult disagreements. Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "About all that, I've been wanting to say, the things got out of hand. I didn't realize how much Mom and Dad relied on your rent until you left. It forced me to step up in ways I probably should have years ago." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Jackson, it was unprecedented acknowledgement of his role in the family dysfunction. "Are things better now?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Different anyway. I'm working full-time at that insurance company. Not exciting, but steady with benefits. Mia's going back to her admin job part-time next month. We're looking at apartments we might actually be able to afford." The changes extended beyond Jackson. My parents had been forced to confront the financial reality of their situation without my contribution. They'd sold their boat, as Mia had mentioned, and my father had taken on weekend consulting work to supplement their income. My mother had started carpooling with other teachers to reduce expenses. More significantly, they'd begun to acknowledge the patterns that had led to our family breakdown. My father, typically the most resistant to introspection, surprised me with an email that must have cost him considerable pride to write. "I've been reflecting on our family dynamics," he wrote. "Your mother and I may have expected different things from you and your brother based on our own biases. Seeing how Jackson has risen to responsibility lately makes me wonder if our protection actually stunted his growth. Likewise, perhaps our expectations of you were unreasonably high because you always seemed capable. I'm not saying we got everything wrong, but I'm open to the possibility that our approach wasn't always fair." For my father, this was equivalent to a dramatic public apology. I responded appreciatively while maintaining healthy boundaries, suggesting we continue rebuilding our relationship gradually through occasional family gatherings where everyone was on equal footing. The first such gathering was a Christmas dinner hosted at a neutral restaurant rather than anyone's home. The atmosphere was initially awkward, but warmed as we navigated new ways of interacting. My parents cooed over baby Ethan, now 3 months old, and developing his own personality. Jackson and Mia shared updates on their apartment hunt. Emma discussed her plans for graduate school. When conversation turned to me, my father asked about my recent promotion with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than the dismissive acknowledgement that would have characterized similar discussions in the past. My mother actually listened when I described a challenging project rather than immediately pivoting to Jackson's latest accomplishment. Most telling was the moment when Jackson interrupted me to change the subject, and my father gently redirected him. Let's let Abel finish his thought first. The subtle course correction spoke volumes about the shifting family dynamic. After dinner, my mother hugged me with tears in her eyes. I miss having you around, she admitted quietly, but I'm proud of how you've built your own life. I wish we'd handled things differently. I wish that too, I replied honestly. But maybe we needed this rupture to create something healthier. The healing wasn't instantaneous or complete. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced, especially during stressful situations. My parents sometimes still defaulted to asking more from me than from Jackson, though they caught themselves more quickly when it happened. Family gatherings weren't always comfortable, but they were increasingly authentic, as we all learned to relate as adults, rather than maintaining our assigned childhood roles. Most importantly, I maintained the boundaries that protected my well-being. I contributed to family events in ways that felt appropriate, but declined requests that echoed the old exploitative patterns. I developed a relationship with my nephew, untainted by the resentment that had characterized my interactions with his father for so many years. Perhaps the most profound change was internal. The constant background hum of inadequacy that had accompanied my family relationships for decades gradually faded, replaced by a quiet confidence in my own worth that wasn't dependent on external validation. I no longer measured my value by what I could provide to others, but by the life I was building according to my own values. "You're different now," Emma observed one evening, as we shared takeout in our apartment. "Stronger. Like you finally believe what some of us have seen all along." Which is what I asked, curious about her perception. "That you're enough exactly as you are," she said simply. "No extra rent payment or sacrifice required." The journey from being told to be grateful for the couch to building a life worthy of genuine gratitude had been painful, but necessary. In refusing to accept less than I deserved, I had ultimately created space for everyone in my family to grow beyond the limiting roles we'd unconsciously accepted. Looking back, I realized the $1,800 I paid for that couch was actually an investment, not in a place to sleep, but in the painful lesson that taught me my own value. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family locked in dysfunction is to break the patterns that keep everyone trapped, even when that means walking away. I hope my story helps someone else recognize when they're being asked to be grateful for crumbs instead of the full place at the table they deserve. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family? Drop a comment below with your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength through difficult situations. Remember, sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's the first step towards something better for everyone. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves out there.